Hi, I'm John McDavitt with the Badger Airbrush Company, and today our special guest is McCalla. Mac, I hear they call you the weatherman. Can you tell me about that?
Well, my expertise, so to speak, is we take a nice shiny object like this, which is sort of out of the box as we in the model hobby call it, and with the simple action of an airbrush, we turn it into something a little more realistic looking, which is normally people see. And after we've done several of these or similar things, we'll take a shiny brand new little cast or model truck like this and we'll reduce it possibly to something like this, time permitting, maybe not to this extreme, but this originally started life as a pretty bright shiny gray car. So you'll see today transformations from this and like this to this, and we'll just get things going.
All right, that sounds great. Well, let's go to an overview and then we'll start getting things dirty.
Let's do it.
We're going to begin with an overview of our equipment, our paints, and our accessories. I'm going to start by explaining the different features of our airbrushes. Now there are three different types of features that you'll find on an airbrush. The first being whether it's a single or a double action airbrush, whether it's an external or internal mix, and lastly, whether it's a bottom feed or a gravity feed. We'll start with the types of actions of the airbrush. A single action airbrush allows you to manually preset the spray pattern before you begin spraying your surface. And once you've done that, all you have to do is press the trigger and spray away. A double action airbrush allows you to adjust the spray pattern on the fly, and that's done by pressing for your air, pulling back on the trigger, which adjusts the amount of paint that you release. The further back you pull, the more paint comes out. You go forward, release, you're done. Now an internal mix and an external mix. External mix is when the paint and the air mix outside of the airbrush. And it's usually used for a coarser spray pattern and to cover a large flat area at one time. An internal mix is where the paint and the air mix within the airbrush. And it's usually for a finer spray pattern and used on finer model work or illustration work or something along that vein. And then the final features of your airbrushes are gravity feed airbrush or a bottom feed airbrush. Now the gravity feed airbrush generally features a chamber on the top of the airbrush. You place your paint inside the airbrush, the gravity takes care of it. When you start to spray, you spray away. Now you can use these airbrushes for finer detail work because you don't have to use as high air pressure on this airbrush as you would on a bottom feed airbrush. The bottom feed airbrush allows us to take a larger quantity of paint, attach the bottle to the jar connector at the bottom of the airbrush, and spray. Now these are generally used for projects that require a larger amount of paint, and you can use a higher amount of pressure because the paint actually has to be sucked up and sprayed out through the airbrush. And those are our differences in the models of our airbrushes. Now to begin airbrushing, we actually need an air source to hook the airbrush up to. And we need a hose to connect to the compressor. Some hoses even come in with a built-in water trap. Condensation can build up in the hose in the airline, and that condensation can get into the airbrush, mix with your paint, and cause an irregular spray, which you probably do not want. Now once you've connected the hose to your compressor, you can begin spraying. Now, there are a variety of different types of compressors. This is a diaphragm compressor right here, smaller, little workhorse. There are silent compressors. Basically, you need to figure out what suits your own needs. And we recommend that whatever compressor you use, your air source is about 30 pounds of pressure for the airbrush. Now we've got our airbrushes and our air source we need some paint. So you can pick from a variety of paints, basically any paint that you can thin down to the viscosity of 2% milk, which is a rule of thumb, 2% milk, you can spray through the airbrush. So we have our paints. We have, you may want a dropper, an eyedropper for the gravity feeds. You can pick your paint up with the eyedropper, drop it into the gravity feed, mix paints this way in the gravity feed. And there you go with that. We have a paint mixer, which is great for mixing your pigment and your medium together so that it doesn't separate. So turn the little guy on like that. Turn him on again, kind of exciting. And it's always good to have a jar full of cleaner handy. So while we're at it, let's discuss cleaning your airbrush. Now, when we want to clean a color out of the airbrush so that we can move on to our next color, or just clean the airbrush to begin with, you can attach the bottle to the bottom of the airbrush. You want to have a paper towel handy, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to spray the cleaner through the airbrush right into the paper towel. We're going to try and get rid of as much of the pigment as possible. Now you can see all that overspray. It's actually a good idea to have another accessory, an overspray cleaning chamber. And what we'll do is we'll put the nozzle of the airbrush into the lid, spray the cleaner into it, and there's no overspray. A lot cleaner, clean air, you're not breathing that paint. So we take that out, and one of the last things that you can do to clean the airbrush is called back flushing. And what we're going to do is take our paper towel, we're going to smother the tip of the airbrush, and we're going to spray. And what that does is it forces cleaner up and into the airbrush and then back down into the bottle. And then we're going to spray one more time to make sure we're clean. And then you're done. You can take the bottle off and put your airbrush away. Now, the only time that you really need to dismantle any part of the airbrush is for long-term storage, if you're not going to use it for a while. And that would be taking the needle out and maybe taking the head assembly and the tip off. And those are the only parts you would want to dismantle because those are the only parts that paint actually touch. Pretty simple. And then our last accessory that we have is our airbrush holder. Really handy dandy. It prevents your airbrush from falling, getting dinged, damaging your needles, and it's also a handy place to just set it if you have paint in it. So it's like an extra hand. And that's about it for our accessories, our tools, our equipment, and our paints. Now we're on to the main event.